Okay, we'll get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to just thank you for joining our webinar, the Virtual Brain Training Programming Your Community Needs During the Pandemic. I'm Jackie Flavin, Customer Insights Leader with Demco, and I'll be moderating our session today. Before we get started, just a couple quick housekeeping details. So on your screen, you'll see a question box on the right-hand side. Feel free to put any questions you have there, or if you need any technical help or anything like that, just use that box to communicate with us. And if we don't get to your question during this session, we'll be sharing out some questions and answers along with the recorded webcast and some other great materials after the event. And you'll notice you'll have our presenters' contact information as well as mine, and you're welcome to use that directly after if you have questions as well that you want to ask after the webinar. And if you haven't seen yet, feel free to use the chat to sort of share who you are, where you're from, and what part of the library you work in. We'd love to just get to know you a little bit. So I think that's all the housekeeping. So let's get on to the main event. I'm very excited to introduce you to our speaker today, Dr. Henry Monka. Dr. Henry is the CEO of Posit Science, where he led the first large-scale clinical trial of a publicly available cognitive training program. He is by far the smartest person that I've ever had the pleasure of meeting with. He earned his PhD in neuroscience at the University of California in San Francisco, where he studied brain plasticity. And before Posit Science, he served as a consultant with McKinsey, and he focused on healthcare and video games. And also he was a science and technology advisor to the British government. So pretty awesome background. And we are so excited that he's here today to talk with us specifically about brain health through cognitive training. So looks like he's got his slides up and we're all ready to go. So I will turn it over to him.
Super. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Jackie. And I'm just really thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to a bunch of librarians and people who work at libraries about brain health and in particular, what libraries can be doing around brain health. And I thought I'd start, I'm actually in my office today quite unusually, like most everyone. I'm working from home today. But I thought I'd start off and just show you more properly what my living room looks like and where I would have been if I had been working from home. That's normally what would have been behind me. And I think you can see that this is the living room of someone who loves books, maybe just a little bit too much. It's really a thrill for me to be talking with you today because hey, I was raised in libraries. I grew up in Chevy Chase, Washington, D.C., and was fortunate enough to have two really wonderful public libraries very close to me. And, I was that kid that I'm sure that all of you know, where, my parents would drop me and my sister off when we were young, and we would spend an hour or two or three at the library picking out new books and reading while my parents, ran errands and did various things. And so, if ever at your library you've helped a kid out who needed a drink of water or needed to help find the bathroom or just needed to find a great new book to read, hey, thanks for me, because once upon a time I was that kid. So today, building on all of that knowledge that I got at the library and then throughout my time in education, we're going to be talking about brain health and hey, what all of us can be doing to take care of our brains, to have healthy brains as we age, and in particular to think about brain health issues during quarantine. I'm going to talk about 6 main things that we can do to take care of brain health, and then I'm going to talk in depth about one of them in particular, which is cognitive training or brain training. Because as Jackie mentioned, I work at Posit Science, and among the things we do here is we build a wonderful brain training program called BrainHQ that's actually been put to use as a library offering all across the country. So I'm going to talk about all those things, but where I want to start, if you don't mind, is hey, in that Q&A window that Jackie mentioned, I'd love it if everyone could just take a moment as I start the talk and hey, tell Jackie and me one thing that you've been doing to keep your brain healthy. And in particular, maybe one thing you've been doing to keep your brain healthy over this time where we've been during the COVID crisis, and maybe we've been at home more than we used to be, and our lives have generally been upended. I think mental health and even brain health has been on just about everyone's mind, and I'd love to hear about one thing you've been doing to take care of your brain and your mind, and why you like it. And I'll have a chance to review some of these, I think, over the course of the talk, and I can talk a little bit about how they fit into how we as neuroscientists think about brain health. So I'll start talking, but you take a moment to start typing, I hope. So let's start with this. When we think about brain health and what we need to do to take care of our brains, it's really important to just talk about one thing to start with, which is, hey, the brain is a physical organ inside of the body, just like the heart, the stomach, the liver, or what have you. And I start here because a lot of times when people think about brains and cognitive function, we might have a very kind of ethereal notion of brains. We think about our self and our conscious experience and the psychological reactions we have to things. And those are all important and valid. But when we think about brain health, we have to get kind of one level underneath that. And we really have to think about, again, the brain is an organic system that's part of the body. And if we're going to keep it healthy, we need to understand, hey, what does it do? And how can we keep it healthy by working with it? So we can take an analogy to the heart. Everyone, I think, is pretty familiar with the heart. And the heart has a job, and I imagine, as everyone here knows, the job of the heart is to pump blood, which, of course, then delivers nutrients all across the body, including the brain. And we've learned an awful lot about what it takes to keep hearts healthy over the past 50 years, right? We know a lot about the role of physical exercise and proper diet and nutrition. We've even learned things about medicines and medical devices that can help hearts that aren't in such great shape. But how about the brain? What's the job of the brain? And when I ask that to people, almost everyone tells me that the answer is thinking, right? The job of the brain is to think. And I totally get why people say that. That's our conscious experience of our own brains, right? We feel like we think about things. That's what the brain is for. But from a neuroscience perspective, or even from an evolution perspective, if I put it that way, that's not really what the brain is for. Thinking's all very nice. We enjoy it, but it doesn't necessarily help us survive in the world and so forth. Really what the brain is there for is to adapt our behavior to new circumstances. The job of the brain is to change so that we can change as our life situation changes. What's interesting about humans as a type of animal is that, hey, we can actually survive and thrive across incredibly different situations in the world, right? There are people who live, in the Arctic Circle, for example. There are people who survive and thrive in the deserts of Asia or Africa. There are people who survive and thrive in urban situations, urban jungles like San Francisco. And we're able as animals to survive in so many different places because our brains can change and adapt and learn new behaviors that help us succeed. And in fact, that changing and adapting of the brain is what's required to keep our brain healthy. And scientists' understanding of how the brain works has really undergone just an absolutely enormous change over the past 50 years. If I were to turn back the clock, let's say to 1970, and we were to ask, really any brain scientist in 1970, how does the brain work? Everyone would have said, sort of this picture on the left, the brain is like a computer chip inside your head, right? It has all these wires, they could connect to each other, conducts electrical information, processes information. The brain's like a chip, and it's hardwired, right? The view at that time was that, certainly after childhood, we had the brains we were going to have for the rest of our lives. And, that led to some very specific viewpoints like, hey, brains wear out. That's what happens when we get older, just like your car might wear out or a computer might wear out, your brain wears out. And it also led to the belief that, hey, there wasn't a lot to be done about that, right? It was a natural part of aging that your brain would wear out. And everyone knows now that this is wrong. And if you take away anything from our talk today, even if it's just here on the second slide, what I would love for you to take away is that, hey, the brain is not hardwired. And in fact, anytime we think about the brain as a computer chip, we are thinking about the brain in a wrong way, in a way that's unhelpful. The view that has really become clear over the past 15 or 20 years now is that the brain is in fact soft-wired, by which I mean the brain is constantly changing and rewiring itself to adapt itself to new situations, new experience, and new learning. And that's just fundamentally how the brain works. It works that way when we're kids, it works that way when we're adults, it works that way when we're senior adults, and it works that way when we're healthy, and frankly, it works that way when the brain is not so healthy as well. It is just how the brain works. And if we could understand how that rewiring works, well, we might be able to do something very helpful with brains. So scientists call this idea brain plasticity, right? Sort of a weird term, but what we mean by plasticity is, hey, that the brain can adaptively change and reorganize itself throughout life. And we really mean this at a very biological level, right? So when brains change as a result of learning or experience, that change occurs at the structural level of the brain. You can see parts get thicker, you can see wiring changes. It occurs at the functional level. The brain becomes capable of doing something it hadn't been able to do before. When you're a kid, you might learn how to ride a bike. and maybe once you retire, you might pick up the piano. Those drive functional changes in the brain. And it also involves chemical changes in the brain, literally the chemistry of how attention and reward work change. So that's a really important thing to understand about brains. And in fact, once that thinking became more clear, once that revolution happened, it became clear that, well, gosh, that's what it means to have a healthy or a resilient brain. A healthy or resilient brain is a brain that is capable of change and ready to keep learning. And you know, there's a slogan I'm sure you've heard, right? An old dog can't learn new tricks. And you know, it's just not the way we think about it anymore as neuroscientists. You know, I think the way we put it now is, hey, dogs get old once they stop learning new tricks. And that dogs, and for that matter, people as well, that, you know, if we can keep our brains in such a way that they are plastic, capable of change, capable of learning new tricks, we are in fact, you know, never going to get old, at least from a brain science perspective. So let's talk about what we need to do to maintain brain health throughout our lifetime as a result of this kind of insight around how brains works. And I'm going to talk about 6 things. I'm going to talk about the role of physical exercise and movement. I'm going to talk about the role of a brain healthy diet. I'll talk about the importance of good sleep, the importance of staying highly socially engaged, the importance of having good vision and good hearing, and finally, the one that's closest and nearest to my heart, the role of cognitive engagement or cognitive training. But each of these is incredibly important. So let's start off with physical exercise. And you might think, well, that's a weird place to start, right? We know that physical exercise is good for the body, but what does that have to do with the brain? And the answer, of course, is, hey, the brain is, as we talked about, a part of the body, right? It's wet and squishy and sits there inside your skull. And keeping your body healthy through exercise can directly improve your brain health as well. So the first part to say about physical exercise and brain health is, hey, physical exercise improves heart health. And literally anything that improves your heart health is good for your brain health as well. And what I mean by that is if you improve your heart health, you're actually going to, for example, lower your blood pressure. And that's going to reduce sort of this accumulation of minor damage that it can occur to your brain over a lifetime, because high blood pressure literally means blood is pounding through your brain and causing tiny damage, but it piles up over the years to your brain. And of course, improving your heart health with exercise also reduces your risk of stroke or heart attack, which can very directly damage your brain. The next thing that exercise does is it helps you process blood sugar more efficiently. And of course, that's why people who are at risk for diabetes are intended to get exercise. But it's important to know that the brain actually uses more than 40% of the energy that's used by the entire body, right? All that brain tissue is working really hard. And if you improve your physical health and improve how you metabolize blood sugar, glucose in your blood, that's also going to help your brain work better and stay healthier. And finally, there are quite direct effects. It's been shown in all kinds of experiments in animal models and humans now that, hey, if you're engaging in intensive aerobic exercise, it actually releases growth factors inside your brain. These are neurochemicals that are actually required to sustain brain health, and neurochemicals that are directly related in brain plasticity, neurochemicals that help the brain make new connections or get rid of ones that aren't so useful anymore, as the case may be. So exercise is incredibly important, and you know, just kind of 3 quick thoughts around what you or people in your life might do to work on exercise. I think all of us have been told by our doctors we should get more exercise, right? That's not an uncommon thing, but it can be helpful to think about exercise not only as important for losing weight or heart health, but motivating people around brain health as well. And that's because brain health is just incredibly important to people, particularly as we get older. Every survey shows from ARP, the National Marketing Institute, that people are incredibly interested in maintaining their brain function. So, you know, today, you know, people can set a schedule, right? Today is always the right day to move from a more sedentary lifestyle to more of a lifestyle that involves more physical exercise. Any exercise is better than none. And when we then think about, hey, what can we do in a longer time period over the next month, is around making it a habit, right? Putting it into your calendar and trying to find time to exercise for 45 or 60 minutes a day, you know, maybe 3 times a week. You know, even during the coronavirus crisis, people can go out and walk, and hopefully things will be back to normal in the next few months, and we can do things like go to the gym and swim. And there are also fantastic online classes at this point through YouTube and other mechanisms like that for people who are looking to do more in their own homes. And of course, over the longer term, the key thing is to stay motivated. And what we, and I think most people see, is that the key to staying motivated is to track progress, right? Have you moved from exercising once a week to 3 times a week? Have you moved from able to walk half a mile to being able to walk a mile or more? And those kinds of gains are incredibly important to keep people focused on this. The second thing I'll talk about with brain health is about a brain healthy diet. And again, you might ask, hey, what does it matter what I put in my mouth with regard to what happens to my brain. As we all know, the mouth goes to the stomach, not to the brain. But as I imagine everyone here, in fact, actually knows, hey, what you eat has a tremendous effect upon your overall health. And hey, one way that eating a brain healthy diet helps is by improving heart health, just as we talked about before. And in fact, the majority of the components of a brain healthy diet are exactly the same as they are from a heart healthy diet. You know, if you've seen books or read books around the Mediterranean diet, for example, where we eat fish, a little bit of red wine, and leafy green vegetables, all these things that are good for your cholesterol and good for your heart health end up being good for your brain health as well. You know, but additionally, it's very clear that there are key nutrients, vitamin E, things called flavonols, you know, omega-3 fatty acids found in fish. All of these things turn out to directly contribute to the overall resilience of the brain. They help it resist minor physical injury, for example, like that comes from high blood pressure or chemical injuries from free radicals and so forth. So if you're thinking about improving your brain health through diet, you know, one thing you can do is, well, just start off by logging your meals and your snacks. You know, the simple act of tracking what you eat is going to help anyone start to make better choices. You know, as I've done this, it's just a lot easier to not have potato chips in the afternoon if I think, well, I'm going to have to write those down, aren't I? So it's a good first step right there. And then over the next month, there's wonderful resources about what's called the MIND diet, M-I-N-D, which I hope you can see on my screen there. You know, this is a dietary approach that was organized by, well, really a large group of scientists, but primarily Martha Claire Morris. You know, what it did was bring together the best thinking around heart health and brain health into a diet that's quite specific for brain health. There's wonderful books that describe this. There's wonderful books full of recipes that can give you or your patrons great advice around how to start to incorporate more brain healthy meals into what people eat. And then of course over the long term, what's wonderful is hey, to, you know, pick 3 to 5 main meals per week and make them brain healthy, learning new recipes from Mind Diet guidelines and so forth. It's good recipes for your brain health, and of course learning new recipes is good for your brain health because it drives new learning as well. A third thing I want to talk about is the incredible importance of sleep. And of course, in America in particular, maybe in a lot of first world countries, we just have a very unhealthy attitude towards sleep. You know, I can't count the number of people, you know, I live out in San Francisco, I work at a startup, a small company, and, you know, particularly in my community, but really everywhere, you know, the number of people who talk about, oh, I brag about because, you know, I get by on 4 hours of sleep per night, right? I pulled an all-nighter last night because we were, you know, cranking on some new software feature, so forth and so on. And it's just nuts from a neuroscience perspective. And I think the reason is that people perceive that when they're asleep, they're not doing anything, right? It just feels like wasted time. If I could sleep 5 hours a night instead of 8 hours a night, wouldn't I have 3 extra hours to do something useful? And that may be true of your conscious experience, but your brain is actually doing incredibly important things while you sleep. You know, one incredibly important thing your brain does is it consolidates new learning and memories during sleep. Your brain actually reviews everything important you did during the day, and it rehearses those memories to lay them down. Scientists have actually shown you can train rats to learn mazes. And if you record their brain activity during the day when they're learning the maze, and then you record their brain activity at night while the rat's sleeping, the same brain activity occurs at night as when the rat was learning the maze. You can literally, from a brain science perspective, watch the rat run the maze at night, except at hyperspeed. And that process is how the rat lays down that memories to learn her way through the maze and get that cheese that she's looking for. Your brain does exactly the same thing. The second thing that happens while you sleep is that your brain cleans itself. Your brain, it turns out, are supported in this kind of lightly salty fluid that helps cushion it. And, you know, as you think and learn and work all day long, you know, your brain puts waste products into that fluid. While you sleep, there's actually these waves of activity that go through that fluid that cleans it out, helps your brain start fresh and shiny, I suppose one might say, the next day. So you really don't want to minimize sleep. However, a lot of people do report difficulties getting a good night's sleep for various reasons. And there's really a wonderful literature around this. And you probably have books in your libraries around what's called sleep hygiene or cognitive behavioral therapy for sleep. And really, there's a couple main notions to how to sleep better if you're having problems in this. You know, the first of which, and this is something anyone can just start doing today, is, hey, follow a nighttime ritual. You know, going to sleep is actually a learned behavior on the part of your brain, just like learning tennis or learning the piano. Our brains learn how to go to sleep on a regular basis. And if you've ever had a young baby in your life, I think you know that sleeping is a learned behavior. One of the ways our brain practices and knows it's time to go to sleep is because, well, we have a nighttime ritual, right? Some people read a book for 15 or 20 minutes. Some people might make a little bit of casual conversation with their partner or someone they're living with. Some people have a drink of warm milk. Those are signals that tell the brain, oh yeah, it's time to get ready for sleep. I should do that. In terms of making changes over a longer period of time, like a month, it's really important to start to make a habit of going to bed at around the same time on most nights. And what I mean by that is, whether you go to bed at 8 p.m. or I should say 11 p.m., your brain practices that, and that time comes and your brain starts to get sleepy. If you go to bed sometimes at 8 and sometimes at 2, your brain's never quite sure that it's time to sleep. So a regular bedtime on most nights helps train your brain to go to sleep. And of course, you can make exceptions, right? You have a late night activity, you're going to spend all night binging Netflix or finishing a John Grisham novel. That's all fine from time to time, but a habit is really a good thing to set up. And over the longer term, it's important to just keep it up. And if a person's still having problems sleeping, there's some wonderful cognitive behavioral therapy apps at this point, things like Sleepio on your phone. And there's quite a number of great books, again, at the library that can teach people sort of more depth around how to maintain sleep hygiene and get a good night's sleep. The fourth thing I want to talk about around maintaining brain health is about staying socially engaged. So it turns out that interacting with families, friends, neighbors, and frankly, even complete strangers is fantastic brain exercise. And that's because talking with people and listening to people and understanding what people mean and understanding what emotions they're expressing, all of that actually challenges basic cognitive skills like attention, speed, memory, social cognition, and it activates systems in your brain around attention and reward and novelty detection. So it's kind of like brain training right off the bat in a way that's super relevant to your everyday life. And of course, this has been really challenging over the course of the coronavirus crisis, right? I think all of us have had problems staying as engaged as we'd like to be with our friends. But again, as far as resolutions are concerned, to improve your brain health through social engagement, a great one is simply to stay in touch. Try every day or every other day, just call a family member you haven't talked to in a while, or an old friend. I've been doing some of that myself, and it's remarkable. Everyone is happy to hear from an old friend or a family member at this point in our lives, I would say. And over the course of the month, think about arranging a meetup, right? In the real world, maybe a socially distant walk, or in the virtual world, maybe a big Zoom get together. I had a birthday recently during the stay-home crisis, and I think the nicest birthday present my wife has perhaps ever gotten to me is she organized a big Zoom get together of all my old college and graduate school friends. Just really wonderful and probably good for my brain also. And hey, over the long term, it's really important to meet new people and make new friends. And of course, that gets challenging as we get older, but a crucial part of this can be taking classes online or in person or volunteer activities. And of course, libraries have an incredibly important role to play in getting people together and providing the opportunity to foster those new connections. The fifth thing I want to talk about is about the real importance of maintaining good vision and good hearing as we get older. As we get older, naturally what happens just because of physical changes in our ears and in our eyes is that we get lower quality information from the sensory world. And that lower quality information hits the brain, and the brain actually, because of brain plasticity and brain change, the brain adapts to this lower quality information. Unfortunately, it doesn't adapt in a terribly helpful way. The brain actually slows down and becomes less accurate in an effort to do it best it can with this lower quality information. You're probably familiar with the idea that maybe your eyes are a little bit blurrier than used to be, or maybe you've had some high frequency hearing loss if you've gotten older, and those drive bad or unhelpful changes in your brain. The flip side of it, though, is that if we can be adding what's called signal instead of noise, if we have a correct prescription for our eyes, so we have glasses or contacts that work, and as we get older, if we get over our social anxiety and put a proper hearing aid to use, that better quality information coming in from our ears and our eyes, well, now we can drive that process in reverse. Thanks to brain plasticity, our brain will actually become faster and more accurate to take better advantage of the new information that comes in. So, hey, what can people do? Well, right off the bat, you can do a little sort of informal active vision and hearing test, right? When you're out in the world, how far can you see in your peripheral vision? Are you noticing things in your peripheral vision, or are things frequently maybe taking you by surprise while you're driving or you're walking? You know, how loud does the TV have to be in order for you to hear it? You know, is it louder than it used to be? Or if you're watching TV with a younger person, you know, do they frequently say it's too loud while you feel it's not loud enough? Both of those can be early signals that you should take action. You know, over a slightly longer period of time, you know, it's really important to pay attention to the world. You know, if you're out taking a walk or you're listening to music, you know, actively use your attention. Hey, what can you notice on your walk with active perception? Are you really hearing the details well of all the music that you're listening to? Hey, those things can both tell you that your sensation isn't what it used to be, but they can also be a form of active brain training to improve what you have. And finally, over the longer term, it's just really important for people to see their doctors on a regular basis to make sure they're getting good, high quality information. I know this personally because I finally, I've never had to wear glasses, but when I turned 50, my wife made me go see an optometrist. So thank you to my wife. And hey, it was time to get reading glasses. And I'll tell you right off the bat, that really dramatically improved my experience of reading in a way that I hadn't really noticed. It just kind of crept up on me step by step. Finally, we're going to talk about the topic that's nearest and dearest to my heart, which is about training your brain. All the things we've talked about previously are a little bit indirect in their effect on brain function. But if you train your brain, well, that's a direct effect on what your brain is doing. And, you know, as I mentioned previously, you know, we now know that new learning rewires the structure and the function and the chemistry of the brain. And in fact, learning that's focused on the speed and accuracy of information processing is particularly important for maintaining or improving cognitive function and brain health. So, you know, the kinds of things that people could do right off the bat are, well, as it turns out, at Posit Science, we make a brain training program called BrainHQ, and I'm going to talk more about that and how it works with libraries. But outside of the online world, you know, it's a really good at all points in your life, but particularly as we all get older, to think about learning a new hobby or returning to an old one. And the best ones are really ones that require speed and accuracy in your brain, like practicing a musical instrument or learning a new language or, you know, various things like that that require you to be quick and accurate. And this is the part where I always have to say, I wish that crossword puzzles were enough, but they really just aren't from a science perspective. You know, I talk to people all the time who tell me, oh, I do a lot of crossword puzzles. Is that going to save me? And I have to sort of gently sit them down on a nearby sofa and pat their hands when we're in person and say, I'm afraid probably not. You know, what turns out was true about crossword puzzles is that people who do crossword puzzles compared to people who don't have better cognitive function, but the rate at which they decline is exactly the same over time. And what that tells us is, hey, people who are smart do crossword puzzles. Good for them. If it's a hobby people enjoy, they should enjoy it. But there's really no evidence that that's going to change the trajectory of your brain health. And that's probably because it doesn't really require your brain to be fast and accurate. You know, that sense of sitting back and just thinking about things for a while, it feels like our brains are busy, but if you look with brain imaging equipment, they're not as busy as you might think. And driving new learning is really what's important. Over the long term, of course, I think what all of us want is to live a life full of continuous learning and new challenges. And that's probably the single most important thing, is to not get into a rut and keep our lives changing in a positive, productive way. And that's what's going to be good for our brains. So, you know, just real quickly, this has really been exacerbated, if anything, during quarantine, right? It's been harder to get physical exercise, right? We can't go out to the places we used to go out to. We're supposed to stay at home. It's been harder to eat a healthy diet, right? Maybe we don't go shopping as often as we used to because we're a little bit scared about going out in the world. Certainly, we're not eating out and having a varied diet as often as we used to. Sleep's tough, right? We have abnormal schedules. We're working in weirder ways, and you know, stress affects all of our sleep. Social engagement has certainly been dialed way down. Hard to see our friends, and even if we do, we're not supposed to give them a hug. We have to maintain social distance, and everything's closed, right? You don't see people as often when everything's closed. Even our vision and hearing can be impaired, right? A lot of people end up putting off what seemed like non-urgent medical care, and as a result, people maybe aren't getting hearing aids when they should, or aren't adjusting their prescription on their glasses. And of course, from a cognitive engagement perspective, working less, probably volunteering less, you know, life just gets a little more monotonous. So all these brain health issues are exacerbated without a doubt during quarantine. And it's important because the way that neuroscientists and neurologists now think about these activities is they all add up. And we have this concept now that's called cognitive reserve. And we think about the brain, you might almost think of it like a gas tank or a bathtub. And what I mean by that is that all the things that help brain function, things like physical activity or brain healthy foods, social engagement, good night's sleep, cognitive engagement, cognitive training, all that's kind of, you know, adding gas to the tank and helping us have a full tank of cognitive reserve. And what that means is we have brains that are more resilient. People who do those activities, are more resistant to the onset of dementia, for example. But of course, there are a number of things that cause gas to leak out of our tank, right? Just the natural processing of aging seems to do that. Certainly if you get brain injuries, maybe you had a concussion when you were young, or maybe as you're older, you had a fall, right? We might have brain unhealthy diets, right? Eat a lot of Kentucky Fried Chicken more than we're supposed to. Social isolation, stress and anxiety, or just not doing much with our brain. All that causes a loss of brain reserve. And so the way scientists think about this now is we really want to make sure we keep that tank as full as possible. The positive things we're doing have to outweigh the negative things that we're doing or the negative things that are happening to us. And hey, if we do that, there can be pretty big benefits, is what the science show us, right? People who engage a lot of physical exercise have a 14% lower risk of dementia. People who are eating a brain healthy diet have a 33% lower risk of what's called mild cognitive impairment, which is pre-dementia or dementia. People who have high levels of social engagement show a 12% lower risk of dementia. Good vision and good hearing, simply getting glasses or a hearing aid can reduce our risk of dementia. People who get a good night's sleep have a 26% lower risk of cognitive impairment compared to people who have interrupted sleep due to sleep apnea or what have you. And in fact, cognitive engagement, people who have historically high levels of cognitive engagement thanks to their work or their hobbies or their activities, they have a 40% lower risk of dementia. So all these things can have a big, big impact together on the quality of life we have and the brain health we have as we get older. And hey, libraries can play an incredibly important role in this. I imagine many of you on this call may have heard of the dementia-friendly library movement. If you haven't, you can Google it. There's a link here on the screen at dfamerica.org, dementiafriendlyamerica.org. That's a wonderful group that's putting together all kinds of guides for all kinds of organizations around, how they can support brain health in their communities, or even support people who have experienced poor brain health by going on to dementia in their communities. They have a wonderful guide in particular for libraries. Libraries can think about offering brain healthy programming, right? Again, maybe virtually now, hopefully back in person soon, speakers or classes on the importance of any of these topics: cognitive engagement, healthy eating, physical exercise, but specifically with a brain healthy spin. As a small thing, maybe this is just me where I grew up, but encouraging people to walk to the library where possible. And again, of course, that's not possible everywhere, but in circumstances where it is, thinking about that walk to the library is contributing not only to your love of learning and your cognitive engagement you'll get from the library, but the physical exercise along the way. And of course, a wonderful role that libraries have in encouraging more social contact and more connections at your events. Particularly as people get older and there may be fewer opportunities for them to meet new people or make new friends at work or at volunteer activities. Library events can be fantastic. And sometimes I'm at events where the way it works is there's just a speaker who talks, and it's a little bit like one of these right now, I'm afraid, on this webinar. But in the events that you manage and run, think about encouraging pair discussions where a person just turns to their neighbor and thinks about a question cooperatively. Or if you have the opportunity in Zoom rooms or things like that to put people in breakout rooms and let them talk to each other for a few moments. That social interaction right there is brain healthy, and it can help your patrons start to make new connections and make friends. You can think about organizing brain health resources. Every one of you, I bet, has dozens, if not hundreds, of books about brain health, one way or the other, in your collections, and organizing them and highlighting them for your patrons. So you're covering exercise, the mind diet, sleep training, under kind of the theme of better brain health. We know that brain health is of incredibly high interest to your senior patrons, and helping them recognize that some of these activities are not just healthy on their own, but particularly relevant to brain health can be a great way to promote them. And of course, a new thing that you can do, thanks to our friends at Demco who are hosting this and the work of the science team here at Posit Science, is you can actually offer a brain training program to your patrons as a library benefit. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit now and dive into this brain training program we've built at Posit Science and how it works with libraries. So I'm going to step back a little bit. We talked a bunch about brain health and brain function, but I'm going to put it in this light just to point out how important this is, which is, hey, brain performance really peaks around our late 20s, and on the average, people decline after that, and that's maybe a little bit sooner than a lot of people have realized. So I thought I'd point it out. You know, what we're looking at here on the left is a graph of chronological age versus relative performance on a bunch of different cognitive tasks, things like vocabulary or reasoning or memory or speed. This is work from Tim Salthouse at the University of Virginia. And you know, what you see is that on the average, most of these lines start going down at the age of 20 or 30. You know, slowly but surely is the best way to put it. You know, in our middle age, we think about getting more distractible. As we, you know, hit 60 or 70, we think about senior moments. In fact, the one thing that doesn't change, or if anything goes up, is vocabulary, right? As we get older, we've read more and experienced the world more. We tend to score better on vocabulary tests. But on these other measures of cognitive function, they are not doing as well over time. And in fact, by the time people get in their 80s, more than 50% of people typically have dementia. And I think most people look at this graph and they think, well, this is not optimal for me. You know, I'd like to do better. You know, we built a brain training program to address that need exactly. And I'll just say one or two words about how it works in detail, or a little bit more detail. You know, we talked about the importance of speed and accuracy as we were talking about brain health in general, but I want to make it very specific here. And this is something we can all do together, even though I can't see you or hear you right now, but we can do this activity together. If you take your thumb and your index finger, and you put it right on your voice box on your throat here. And again, I encourage everyone, just do this. I can't see you, I can't hear you, you're not going to embarrass yourself, but it's a fun activity to do. And now I want everyone to make the sound ba, like a bottle, B-A, ba, ba, ba. And as you're doing that, I want you to actually feel how your lips open and your voice box starts to vibrate, ba. Your lips open and your voice box start to vibrate at exactly the same time, ba. But now make a different sound. Now make the sound pa, P-A, like my papa, pa, pa. If you do that carefully, you'll feel that your lips start to open just a little bit before your voice box starts to vibrate. Pa. That very short gap is only about 20 or 30 milliseconds long. It's very brief. But that gap is what makes the difference between a ba and a pa. And in fact, if your brain is fast and accurate, you're going to hear speech very clearly. You'll be able to hear well in a noisy environment. You'll be able to hear it clearly when people are talking very quickly or in noisy environments like on cell phones or at restaurants. But if your brain has started to slow down, right? Maybe your hearing loss has started to kick in and you haven't have a hearing aid yet. Maybe you had a concussion and that slowed down your brain. If your brain has started to slow down, you won't hear that short gap, and it's actually going to be less clear to you are people making a ba sound or a pa sound. Now, your brain's not going to say, oh, I've slowed down, I can't hear a difference between a ba and a pa. Everything's just going to sound a little bit more murky to you. And as a result, you won't be able to hear as well on a cell phone or in a noisy environment. And in fact, you won't be able to remember as well as people are talking to you because your brain's working harder just to hear what they're saying. So that core insight about how the brain works, which is illustrated here with a different example, often people talk about time and kind being hard to distinguish. You know, we can speed that up, as I talked about, with the right kind of brain training. And in fact, we did that. So the science team at Posit Science, you know, working on this revolution around brain plasticity over the past 20 years, you know, we built a brain training program called BrainHQ. And you know, it has dozens of brain training exercises in it, and every one of them is built on these basic principles, improving the speed and accuracy of information processing, being adaptive so it can get as easy or non-challenging as it needs to be to help people get on board, but also can get very challenging for people who are trying to push their performance. And built with auditory and visual stimuli that promote generalization, so the cognitive improvements from the exercise are manifest in the real world as well. And of course, they're designed to be very engaging so that they engage things like attention and reward and novelty detection, which are important to drive brain health. You know, we build these exercises, we try them out, we test them on large groups of people so we know what good performance looks like, we know what not so good performance looks like. And then we have smart algorithms that can sequence these exercises so people go through them in a way that's exactly right for them to improve their brain function and their brain performance. And that's turned into this brain training program called BrainHQ. It's got really wonderful features to help patrons meet their goals. Got dozens of exercises. Like I said, it actually personalizes within minutes. As soon as a person starts to train, it gets easier or more challenging, depending on exactly where their personal brain is, and helps people track their usage and progress and performance to maintain motivation over time. Actually gives them weekly challenges with goals and email or text reminders to help them going, and really has a lot of brain health information in it as well, which is based on some of the material I pulled together for this talk. It's available on computers, tablets, phones, Windows, Mac, Android, Apple, all the things you might expect these days. And people can do it at their own home during the COVID crisis, but people can also come into any public terminal, and many of you probably offer public internet access at your libraries. People can come in and just train directly on a web-connected library computer as well. And people like doing it. They train pretty frequently, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. I thought about doing a demo, but Jackie suggested that live demos on the web often don't work too well on webinars, so I'll just show you a few screenshots. It's more exciting if you do it, I'll promise you that, and I'll talk about a way you can try this out afterwards. But when people log into BrainHQ, right, they see a dashboard, and here's mine recently. It gives you information around how much you've trained this week, tells you the days you trained. You can see that, this week so far, I trained a bunch on Sunday and then some on Wednesday, and I'll train later on Friday because I'm training 3 or 4 days a week. And you can actually then either pick individual exercises to do in BrainHQ, or you can actually pick a personal trainer, which will guide you through the exercises and make sure you're training in exactly the right way. When you pick the personal trainer, it sequences this group of exercises, and you can see that it's asking me to do an exercise called visual sweeps to start with. You can see I've done a lot of levels. It's giving me the 30-second level of it. And then it gives me a set of other exercises that it thinks are right for my brain function as well. And for people who want to pick individual exercises, there are actually dozens of exercises in BrainHQ covering attention and brain speed and memory and people skills like learning names and faces, and intelligence, by which we mean working memory and rapid decision making. Even trains navigation, things about wayfinding and mental rotation and maps and so forth. And again, without a demo, I'll just show you kind of, what do these exercises look like? And of course, they're built on very serious brain science, but when you do them, they're like playing little games. And I would never call them brain games because, brain games, there's a million brain games on your phone. And the main thing about brain games is they've never been shown to work, whereas BrainHQ has been through many clinical trials, as I'll talk about. But they're designed to be engaging and fun and compelling in this way. Here's another exercise that's focused on tracking multiple objects across the screen. But the most important thing about them is that they have been shown to work, and that's what really makes BrainHQ unique in this field. And many of you probably know that when Stephen Hawking wrote A Brief History of Time, he was asked to include only one equation in the book, but he felt like it was important to say E equals mc squared, and he did. I'm no Stephen Hawking, but I think we can all be inspired by great authors and great scientists, so I've included one graph in this talk to say, we've put BrainHQ through trials that independent academic investigators have as well. This is a study that we ran in collaboration with Mayo Clinic and the University of Southern California, where we looked at more than 400 people who didn't have dementia, just regular healthy older people. And half of them did BrainHQ, shown here in green. And the other half of them did, a control activity where they, watched educational DVDs, things like Carl Sagan's Cosmos, for example. Great activities, but probably don't make the brain faster and more accurate the way BrainHQ did. And what we saw is that, hey, we did make brains faster and more accurate. And the green here is BrainHQ, and on the left is people's scores before brain training, and the right afterwards. We see very little change in the DVD group, but of course, the folks who did these exercises in BrainHQ, we improved their brain speed tremendously. This is a measure of how much time the brain needs to process information. Lower scores are better. We see a beautifully significant improvement. And then we looked, or neuropsychologists looked with standardized tests of memory, things like how many words can you remember, how much detail in a story can you remember, if someone gives you a list of digits, can you repeat them backwards? And this is on an IQ-like scale. We see this beautiful improvement in the BrainHQ group and essentially no real change in the DVD group. The memory improvements in the BrainHQ group are actually about 4 times larger than they were in the control group. And then we also had a measure of everyday cognition. We simply asked people, standardized questions. Can you remember the names of people that you meet if you're at a party? Can you hear what people are talking about in a noisy restaurant? And they just rank it on a scale of 1 to 5. Again, lower scores are better. We see this beautiful improvement in the BrainHQ group and really no change or even a slight worsening in the control group. And I'm not a horse racing man myself, but when we did unblind these results, we were absolutely thrilled. We felt like we had hit the trifecta. People got faster brains, it improved their memory, and the effects were big enough that they noticed in their everyday life. And in fact, those results have been shown just again and again and again, not just by studies led by scientists here at Posit Science, but by independent studies led by academic scientists with grant funding. And I won't go through all the detail, but I'll say that they've seen improvements in cognitive function, things like memory, speed, attention, executive function, even global measures. But we've also importantly seen improvement in real world function. You know, this kind of brain training actually leads people to make fewer at-fault crashes because their visual systems are faster and more accurate. Helps people maintain what are called IADLs, independent activities of daily living, which are skills required to live independently in their own homes. Makes them faster at everyday tasks and reduces risks of, you know, normal age-related decline and things like health-related quality of life or depressive symptoms. Even helps people hear better in noisy situations for all the reasons I talked about. And of course, as brain scientists, near and dear to my heart, you know, we see fantastically interesting changes in the electrical activity of the brain and structural and functional measures of the brain, and even how different regions of the brain are connected to each other. So it really is rewiring the brain, and it's really doing that in a way that improves cognitive and real world function. So who actually ends up benefiting from this? Well, it turns out that really just about everyone can benefit from a healthier brain. You know, when we started the company, we assumed this was just going to be for older people, but it turns out that at any age, there's an enormous variation in brain performance. And what that means is at any age, there's the opportunity to improve brain performance. We're actually working right now with special forces groups in the US military that are using BrainHQ to take people who are frankly at top performance and make them even better. Probably our most famous user is Tom Brady, and some of you may be fans and some of you may be whatever the opposite of a fan is. But you know, a fascinating thing about Tom is he is, of course, you know, had a fantastic career, and he's now the oldest quarterback who's really ever been playing. And the way he does this is that through a combination of his intensive physical training, but he uses BrainHQ to keep his brain at its sharpest as well. We've done wonderful work with knowledge workers, middle-aged knowledge workers who are already pretty smart and sharp, but have used BrainHQ to improve their cognitive performance further in the workplace situation. We work with healthy older adults, ranging from independent living older adults to people who are in senior communities who want to maintain great brain function. And we've even worked with groups where people are in, you know, the earliest stages of dementia or significantly at risk for dementia. I work with the Mayo Clinic that uses BrainHQ as a program for people who've just been diagnosed with pre-dementia conditions in order to help them. So all of us can benefit from brain fitness. And it's, you know, by analogy, I think you might think, hey, all of us can benefit from physical fitness as well. You know, just about everyone can get off the couch and do more exercise, whether it's a very sedentary person or whether it's Tom Brady. And that same thing approves to brain fitness as well. So we get wonderful feedback from people who are using BrainHQ. I'm not going to go through it all right now, but it's a pretty fun place to work because people call us and they tell us everything from I love BrainHQ to it improved my memory to hey, it saved my life because I was driving late at night and I noticed a dump truck was about to jump a stop sign and I stopped my car in time. So brain training can have a real impact on people's lives. And how do people get it? Well, you know, on our end, they come to the website or they go to the App Store, or maybe they get it from their doctor. We work with senior communities. We work with Medicare plans. But a very exciting thing we've been doing over the past several years now with our friends at Demco is making BrainHQ available through libraries. And why, you might ask? And the answer is pretty simple. As I said at the beginning of this call, I love books and I was raised in libraries. And you know, right now, if people come to the website, BrainHQ costs money. It costs $14 a month because, of course, we got to keep the lights on and pay the engineers and all that kind of thing. And I do have people write to me on a regular basis, write to our support group, and they say, hey, this is fantastic, but I'm on a fixed income. I can't really afford $14 a month. And through this wonderful partnership we've had with Demco, we've now been able to make BrainHQ available to more than 200 public libraries across the country. And every single one of those libraries makes BrainHQ available just like they might make electronic books available. Patrons can simply check out BrainHQ and use the full version to improve their brain health. And that's just been wonderful because it contributes to our mission, right? Our mission is to get this science out to absolutely everyone who can benefit from it, regardless of their ability to pay. And being able to now tell people, hey, you can get BrainHQ from your public library, give them a call, see if they offer it. If they don't, tell them to call Demco and let's get them set up. Just a wonderful way to make sure that this kind of breakthrough in brain science is available to every single person across the country and one day across the world who can use it. So we're just thrilled to be partnering with libraries in this way. Finally to wrap up, hey, brain training is really ready to be put to use at this point. There are new clinical guidelines from all kinds of thought leaders around brain training. National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine reviewed the literature and said, hey, people who want to be proactive should do 3 things, right? They should get exercise, control their blood pressure, and do a science-based cognitive training program. The Alzheimer's Association wrote a position paper where they said, hey, enough science has been done, it's time to put this to work. We can always do more science, but let's make this practical. The American Academy of Neurology last year recommended that people who are having memory decline do physical exercise and do cognitive training. Even the World Health Organization now recommends cognitive training to maintain cognitive function in healthy older adults. Wonderful reviews from academic journals. There's Neuropsych Review talking specifically, looking at brain training programs for older people, and very proudly for me, calling out the fact that posit science programs have fulfilled the gold standard for clinical trials. And even the NIH reviewing the literature, making the very nice statement that posit science drives improvements that are significantly better than other kind of brain games and things of that nature. So I'll just leave you with the thought that it's a new way to improve the lives of library users and patrons everywhere, and a new way to get science out into the world, and a new way particularly to contribute to brain health for all your patrons during these troubling times of COVID, but then beyond that as well. So I will stop there and kick it back to Jackie, and we can see if there are any questions that have come up on this.
Awesome, thank you so much. I love your presentation, and I just think this is such a fascinating topic, and you guys are doing so many wonderful things. We do have some time here for questions, and we have a couple that have popped in throughout the presentation. If you have a question, please submit it, and we'll see if we can get to it here. So here's one question. I think this came in when you were presenting those scores, how people scored after they had done some BrainHQ training. The question is, are the improved scores sustained?
That is a great question. And the short answer is yes, but of course it wears off. And the best way to think about this is like physical exercise. If you begin a program of exercise, you go to the gym for a while, you're going to get those health benefits, right? You'll be stronger, you'll have more endurance, you might lower your cholesterol. If you stop going to the gym, you don't lose all those benefits the day you stop going to the gym. But you do lose them step by step. I went to the gym a lot in my 20s, and I'm over 50 now, and I'd have to say that unfortunately it does not last forever. Brain training is the same way. In the studies that we've done, for example, 3 months after people do brain training, we can certainly see that if they've done no more brain training over those 3 months, that they're still improved relative to their peers or the control group. But you can also see that the effects have started to wear off. And so what we generally recommend is, like physical exercise, and try and make it a regular habit. But we absolutely know and see, of course, that people are going to take breaks from time to time, right? They're going to get busy with a new hobby or something they have to do in their families. And if you take a break for a while, that's fine, but then eventually you should come back to your brain training, just like you might come back to your physical exercise. Thanks, Jackie. That's a great question.
Yeah, and here's another one. Let's see. What is the best way to activate the brain in a virtual learning session? Trivia, watch sessions. This person said that they've been working to engage attendees online, but it's hard, and she's troubled with, or he is troubled with, oversaturating online programs and activities.
I think that's a fantastic question, and I'm not an expert in this, but luckily my wife is. My wife's a professor of biology at San Francisco State University. And one of the things she studies is, hey, what's kind of the intersection of neuroscience and learning principles? And so, I'll give you 2 brief thoughts. One of which is, hey, online you might Google the 5E model. The 5E model refers to kind of a sequence of things that you can use to organize your online or frankly any activities, where you start off engaging the audience and then you elaborate some knowledge, and kind of gives a flow for it. And the most important thing about the 5E model is it thinks about the neuroscience of it, right? We want to kick off with something that's engaging so that people immediately get involved. And then we want to give them the opportunity to build on their knowledge and then come back and reflect on it. The second thing that I've learned from my discussions at home from my wife is, as best we can, and we weren't able to fully do this on this webinar today, but perhaps in your settings you'll be able to, is that what's engaging can be interactions with other peers who are on the webinar. So to the extent that you can provide an opportunity for people to talk as pairs, right? Ask a question and say, hey, discuss with your peer, right? To the extent that you have the opportunity to use online features like breakout rooms where you can put people into small groups and give them a question and then have them come back and report. You know, that can really activate people's brains. Working with other people is an incredibly strong way to activate people's brains. And it can also provide some kind of rhythm to the engagement again, whether it's an in-person issue or an online person. And, you know, take the underlying learning that you're already driving with your activities and, you know, make it better for the brain and make it more peppy for your audience. It's a great question, thank you. But anyway, look at the 5E model. I believe if you Google that, you'll find some helpful resources on that. If you don't, send me or Jackie a note and I'll ask my wife what you should be reading and send it on to you. Thanks.
Your kids must be geniuses.
You know, when you are raised the kid, my wife's also a neuroscientist, and I remember at some point my son putting his head down on the table when he was about 10 years old and saying whatever he was being accused of wasn't his fault. His brain made him do it. My wife and I thought maybe a little bit too much brain science is going on.
We have another question here. Is there any data as to whether this program helps people that are in more advanced stages of dementia?
Yeah, that is a great question and one that's really of strong interest to us on the science side. We built the program originally to maintain or improve cognitive function in healthy older adults, as you saw. There have at this point been a number of initial studies in what's called mild cognitive impairment or a pre-dementia condition. And this is when people are seen by a doctor and it's clear that their memory or their thinking has declined over the past few years. But they don't really meet the criteria for Alzheimer's disease quite yet. And there have been some really promising results with BrainHQ in there, although I can't strictly speaking recommend it for that because it's a medical issue. You know, as we get into early stage dementia, I think there's an incredible literature that says that people in early stage dementia can benefit, frankly, from all of these brain health activities, right? They should be getting regular exercise. And cognitive and social stimulation is incredibly important for them. And to the extent that we have a person with early stage dementia who is not benefiting from that, that's almost certainly going to exacerbate that decline. We haven't yet done clinical trials of BrainHQ in early stage dementia, and you know, it might be required to modify BrainHQ to make it more useful to people with early stage dementia because of the challenges that they have, even just in computer use, for example. But on the whole, I would encourage anyone who's thinking about early stage dementia to recognize that hey, this is a person that can benefit from a full life and cognitive stimulation and social interactions and exercise in the way that any of us can. And I hope over the future that BrainHQ or a modified version of BrainHQ becomes a part of that.
Awesome. We have another question here. It says, do you recommend pre-vegan or Q10 supplements?
Was the first one pre-vegan, like a vegan diet?
Oh, it may be prevegan. I might be pronouncing it wrong.
Prevegan. No, is the short answer. A vegan diet, there's probably some benefit to. Prevegan, probably not. Look, let me say a word about Prevegan in particular. Hey, that company should be put out of business. It's just as simple as that. Prevegan, the claims on Prevegan are based on a single trial that did not show benefit on the whole to people who took Prevegan. Prevegan has been at war with the Federal Trade Commission for 5 or 6 years at this point, and they make so much money by selling those supplements that they can hire a lot of very expensive lawyers to fight with the Federal Trade Commission. It's just not how science should be done, is the long and short to that. Supplements for brain health in general, I mentioned some of the things like flavonols, omega-3 fatty acids that are helpful to the brain, and those may be helpful in supplement form as well. The jury is not really in on this front. It goes back and forth, for example, on fish oil. If you're thinking about taking supplements, what I'd encourage you to think about is improving your overall brain healthy diet. It seems quite likely that the sort of broader additive benefits of eating green leafy vegetables, eating fish on a regular basis, drinking a glass of red wine from time to time, avoiding fried foods. Those things together seem to be more valuable than kind of extracting that into a single supplement form. That may change, right? There are some good studies going around certain kind of supplements, and we may learn more. But the ones we've seen so far, again, I think reading a book about the mind diet and following those principles is more likely to be helpful. And again, I have nothing nice to say about Prevegan on the whole. I would like to stop seeing those commercials when I watch the news.
Awesome. Dr. Henry, thank you so much. We're out of time today, and I mean, I personally could keep asking you questions forever. It's just so fascinating, all the work that you do. And we hope for all our attendees, we really hope that you were able to take some ideas away that you can implement in your library. And we will be sending out a feedback survey after the webinar, so please take a few moments to share your thoughts. And then in a few days, we'll send out an email with the slides, a link for the recording, some of the Q&A, and then a few other resources as well. Dr. Henry has a great PDF that we would like to send out as well.
Yeah, we've put together a wonderful brain health booklet that gets into everything we talked about today in a bunch more depth, which we hope might be of interest to you. Thanks, Jackie.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Hey, then thanks for everyone for joining to talk about brain health for an hour. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Take care. Thank you.